provide continuation for sustained development. Therefore, if elected as president, we will make sure that we come out with at least 5-year developmental plan. And we will make sure we put plan discipline in place. There is no point realizing, as it is now, that there is no power. And if there is no power, the factories will not function. They will not be viable. They will be closed, as they are closed now. There will be unemployment. With unemployment, there will be insecurity. So infrastructure, power, water, communication, and then, of course, agriculture. We believe the quickest way to wipe out unemployment in this country substantially is through developing agriculture. I think those Nigerian governments that meekly submitted to IMF demands of not subsidizing agriculture have done a lot of damage to this country. We ought to know that Europe and America, for the last 6 years, could not agree on agricultural subsidy. Why should anybody tell Nigerians then, don't subsidize agriculture, and the person will say yes, sir, and proceed to the most trust way of sustaining the economy and the life of the country, agriculture. Then manufacture for the goods and services required and the employment and solid minerals. Our biggest problem in Nigeria is unemployment. It's the biggest threat to the nation.
Thank you, General. Dr. Patutomi, how would you respond to that question?
Yes, indeed, what matters is the Nigerian people. How well does a policy serve the Nigerian people? It does not matter who has passed it into law or has made it a policy of government. If that which this regime, or any other regime for that matter, brings to the table one day before they leave, serves well the Nigerian people, our challenge is to evaluate that. And that is why you have transitions between regimes. If I am elected, I will immediately put together a transition team. And the job of that transition team is to quickly begin to evaluate those policies that are coming from the incumbent regime. And all policies that serve well the Nigerian people will be taken on board and implemented. The reason Nigeria is full of white elephant projects is that succeeding regimes always think that policies should be initiated by them and concluded by them. And this creates a problem for continuity in our country and has cost the poor people of this country billions of naira. We must stop that. So when we do a careful evaluation during the transition period of what policies are on the table, we'll take on board those that serve the Nigerian people well and reject those that don't serve the Nigerian people well. And we can then shape tomorrow with those.
Thank you very much, Dr. Utomi. Mohammed, you have the next question, also for Dr. Utomi.
Prof, how would you ensure free, just distribution of the nation's wealth, especially given the fact that all the sections of the country have alleged that they are being marginalized in the sharing of the national wealth?
This is one of the best questions I've heard in a very long time, because people confuse resources with wealth. Some of the richest countries in the world have no resources. And I have repeated in this country that it is possible for Sokoto to be much, much wealthier than Rivers State. The most important resource that any people can have is its human resource. And if we use our human resources well, everybody can be just as wealthy. So what we must do is focus on what the factor endowments of each region is. What is the factor endowment of Bauchi? What are the factor endowments of Rivers and Bayelsa? You can shape industry in Rivers and Bayelsa that make people there wealthy, yet the industry in Bauchi will make them much wealthier. You take information technology, for example, that's created so much wealth that one man is worth more than many countries. And you ask, what are the natural resources that were used to produce that? Of course, you know that the natural resource is what's here. That's why we'll invest massively in education across this country. I have a special program to deal with the Al-Majiri challenge, to provide people opportunity to go to both Islamic schools because their faith is important to them, and to go to Western education, and to have the skills and the competencies to be able to come out and create so much wealth around them that they don't even care what natural resource exists anywhere in this country. When we spread education around the country, make sure everybody is well educated evenly, and people have the talents and the skills to go out there and create opportunities and wealth and jobs, then we'll find that people will stop quarreling. I have Malaysia as my favorite example. In those days in Malaysia, you had ethnic quarrels. In 1969, there were ethnic riots. People's stools were being slashed. Today, nobody in Malaysia asks whether you are Malay, Indian, or Chinese, because leadership that thinks has managed to make them prosperous, and everybody is worrying about how to make their children's tomorrow better than their today. This is what Nigeria needs, not people quarreling about marginalization. Marginalization is the most abused word in Nigeria, and there's no need for it to be, because we have the talents and we have the resources to make the people of Nigeria prosperous. And that is why my vision, and if people vote for me this year, they will see that vision come alive. It's a vision of a nation of people of industry and integrity. And the dignity of the human person is at the center of our choice.
Well, thank you. General, how would you ensure a fair, just, and equitable distribution of the national wealth?
I believe what is still in the Constitution about revenue allocation formula can be updated with the consent of Nigerians. But fundamentally, education is our problem. If you educate people, then you prepare the nation to earn respect for itself, locally and internationally, and to be able to utilize its human resources. For example, in the First Republic, Northern Nigeria then, their budget for education is 43% of the budget. In the Southwest, it was 10% more than that. So why people are wondering that the Northerners, in quote, and the Southwesterners never forget Awolowo and Ahmadu Bello. Education, education, education. If people are educated, there is a level below which they will refuse to be exploited. But when people are uneducated, they are made very vulnerable, either ethnic-wise, religious-wise, and regional-wise. So if Nigeria wants to really take off, it has to review its educational system. I believe education is the solution to our problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General. Tamani, you have the next question for the General.
General, in Nigeria, we are yet to separate governance from politicking. In other successful democracies, once elected, the president concentrates on governance through the party manifesto and programs, and the political party interference in governance is put in abeyance. What would be your approach, General, to the concept of governance without endless politicking if elected president?
Well, the democratic institutions must be radically changed. I would like to give you an example of one European country, Italy. Italy changed government between the end of the war to now, virtually by as many years. But the gross national product of Italy kept on going up. Why? Because the institutions of the country can sustain political changes. And unless our institutions, the civil service, the bureaucracy, the judiciary, the military, other law enforcement agencies, unless they are manned by knowledgeable people of integrity or professional integrity, the nation will be waffling around for generations. I therefore firmly believe institutional strengthening is among the priorities of Nigeria, to make sure that while politicians are making noise and misbehaving themselves, the technocrats are knowledgeable, firm, they are of professional and personal integrity that can carry our nation through crisis. I think this is only not for Nigeria. It's part of underdevelopment, and Nigeria should be out of that grade now. We should be a developing country of great hope, and that can only be found in good educational system and strengthening of institutions, and for Nigerians themselves not to allow corrupt leadership at any level, whether local government, state, or at the center. And this is only possible when there is free, fair, and credible election. That is the starting point.
Thank you, General. Dr. Tommy.
Indeed, that question speaks to one of the biggest challenges that we have. I believe that the reason that we have had all the resources that we've had in the last 8 years and yet have failed so miserably, it's not because the people who run the government are necessarily terrible people. It's because of what I have come to call the triumph of politics. Indeed, a minister in this government told me pointedly that the challenge of the power problem, and he should know because he was responsible for it at some point, is pure, simple politics. And this must end. We must move from politics to nation building. I think the point that we cannot get away from is that our country needs new kinds of leaders who don't think politics 24/7. People who think nation building. The former economic advisor, Dr. Osita Obu, also said somewhere not long ago that what Nigeria needs are techno-politicians, not just the typical politicians, but technocrats who have moved into politics. And if you look carefully, the African countries that are making progress have in their leadership position those you could call, to use Osita Obu's words, techno-politicians. Look at Botswana, the kind of people who come to leadership. Why did Benin Republic, just last year, elect what you would call in Nigeria a technocrat? But in Nigeria, because we have politicians who have made technocrats and people who have knowledge, people who think, look like they are theory people, seem like they come from a strange land, out of the way. Nigeria is unable to get it together. We need people who think and who work. That's what we need, not just politics as usual.
All right, thank you very much. Well, it's just as well that the candidates have identified education as a major issue, because there is a unanimous call for the restructuring of the education sector to meet the developmental needs of the country, especially technical and technology education. What aspects of the education sector would you give priority attention in this regard if you become president of Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much. The first thing that I will do is I'll move Nigerian education from certification to providing functional skills to people. If you look today, our educational system does not, give us people who have specific skills. People want to get certificates. In fact, what we now have is a rush to certification of illiterates. But, and I tell this story all the time, I walk into a room, the first thing I look at is the tiling. If the lines are straight, I say, this was done by a Ghanaian or Togolese. If they are the way we normally see most of our buildings, I say, this is Nigerian. That has to change. When I said it, several times I've said it in front of architects, they all laughed. How come you know? I know, because our educational system has not been able to provide for those kinds of skills. Even tertiary education, you hire a graduate today, you put him to work. No, many major corporations now hire graduates, train them for 1 year before they then take a test to be hired into the company. That is unacceptable. Education must be made to produce people who are functional. The scrapping of polytechnics, I think, is one of those red herrings again. We need people who have technical skills. There is nothing that should prevent somebody who has a HND from earning 4 times as much as somebody who has a BSc in sociology. We need the skills that the polytechnics will produce. It's not about whether you are big or small. It's about the nature of the skill. That's why it's called a polytechnic, not a university. These are the things we're not getting right. But we're looking at prestige. We're looking at climbing the ladder in the public service. We are doing Nigeria a grave disservice if we don't go for functional education. Look at the MBAs today that come out of schools like the one that I've taught him, compared to those who go to where they teach them theory. They're not the same. An MBA coming from the school where I have taught would earn about 6 times, will get at least 6 times as one who comes from a regular Nigerian university, because his education is functional. The other is a certificate, is knowledge just given. We need to recognize that education must go in that direction. But I will give priority to primary education for now, because what we're getting is garbage into the universities and garbage out. We must begin to do the foundations right. I will hire graduates to teach in primary schools and have them go for retraining every summer, because they are so important. Building that foundation is key. We pay them well and motivate them to change educational perspective.
Thank you very much, General. What aspects of the educational system will you give priority attention if you become president?
I think, firstly, the infrastructure. The adequate classrooms, well-equipped laboratories, workshops, and then teachers. Teachers must be motivated to stay in the profession and teach. We have the infrastructure. I think it's a question of institutional strengthening. We have the polytechnics. I agree we must have functional education. But at which stage? Primary and secondary education must not be neglected. I endorse, or I will make sure that the graduates are given crash programs in the teachers' institutes throughout the country to teach in primary and secondary schools. And the secondary school teachers to be retrained. And then they must be well paid. I think that innovation, we must get education right in this country. That will be the beginning of the end of our underdevelopment.
Thank you very much, General. Mohammed, you have the next question.
In the last 10 years, Nigeria has witnessed the emergence of a phenomenon called godfatherism, where political leaders control their elected nominees for the politics of personal interest. If elected president, how do you intend to neutralize the godfatherism phenomenon?
Well, accommodating the mediocre and the incompetent, I think I blame the lack of education of voters by politicians. I believe politicians should spend more time in their constituencies to educate and motivate voters. And appointments should be by merit. Okay, we have a federal character syndrome, but I think it can be accommodated for given social stability. But I refuse to believe that there is any contradiction between having federal character to give confidence to all people and then the mediocre employment in the public service, in the bureaucracy. I don't think there is any locality in this country where you can't get enough graduates now maybe you can't get enough mathematics graduates and physics graduates, but you can have graduates that you can retrain, as I said earlier, to make sure that you put a very high standard in the entry point in various departments of the government, and in fact, not only government, but business community and so on. Because really, there is nothing more demoralizing or nothing that retards development than having mediocre workers at any level in any profession. I therefore feel that again we are going back to education. We have to make sure that people are employed, or those that interview people are competent, which means we have to have competent regulatory agencies. All the regulatory agencies we have should be manned by competent bureaucrats or technocrats, so that no mediocres are given a chance, to start the godfatherism or to extend it.
Thank you very much, General. Dr. Patutomi.
Well, thank you. Just to reassure myself that this was about godfatherism in Nigerian politics. Okay. Now, just look at the examples of states where you have had dominant godfathers. Look at the ruins of Anambra. Look at the inactivity of Oyo. You can go on and on and on. It should be clear that the Nigerian people are worsted by this kind of politics. So the challenge must be to go to the Nigerian people and make them own the process and prevent godfathers from influencing how things are done. In the era of the godfathers in Anambra State, teachers were not paid, schools were closed for 1 year. It goes on and on. Look at the turmoil, the kind of horrible violence that you have in states where godfathers are dominant. One major way of dealing with it, the way that I will go about, is to ensure electoral process reform. This year, INEC said that there was going to be a spending limit of 500 million naira for the presidential campaigns. I am by far one of the smallest spenders, and I know I'm not too far off that mark. So you can imagine what the others, especially the ruling party, has spent. They are violating the very rules that INEC set up. This is what brings godfathers into Nigerian politics. This is what leads to buying the people and therefore makes the field a zone of warfare. That must change. Electoral process reform will change it.
Thank you very much. Tamani, you have the next question.
National statistics indicate that over 60% of the Nigerian population reside in the rural areas. Dr. Pat Utomi, if you are elected president, excuse me, what would be your blueprint for rural development such that urban drift is curtailed?
Well, thank you so very much. That is a question dear to my heart. You know, traveling in the Northeast a couple of weeks ago in Biu, we met with a retired commissioner of police who is active there. And he was pointing out to us how sharp a difference the life is for the average Nigerian who lives 5 minutes away from the city. And as we traveled through, the Northeast, I saw that every time you drove 5 minutes out of a city, quality of life in the city is terrible enough, but 5 minutes out of it and you hit what can be called rural areas, you go from the 19th century to the 17th century, literally. That kind of condition must not be allowed to exist. It is to ensure that that happens that our agriculture policy will funnel back and invest in infrastructure, in those things that elevate the quality of life of people in rural areas. What we failed to do when agriculture was the mainstay of our economy in the 1960s, we invested in the cities. We have a rural healthcare scheme that I've talked about. If you go to my website, www.patutomi2007.com, you will see our position on these issues. But on this health service particularly, we'll take NYSC doctors, we'll have mobile hospitals. Because in rural areas, many people have to, especially in the Niger Delta where I come from, if you go into some of those areas and a woman is going to have a baby, she may need to travel for 10 hours by boat, by bicycle, by all kinds of things before she reaches a maternity ward. Now, if you had mobile hospitals that could move those on water, on ferry bound, those that are road bound, they can go close to those rural people providing services. But we must ensure that those issues of water supply, those issues of basic infrastructure, light, get to rural areas because we have the capacity to do it. It is not not outside of our capacity to provide those things. But because we are so bad, the Nigerian political elite is so urban-based and so focused on the quality of life of urban people, and they created these urban centers that attract these outflows and lead to the kind of population problems that we have. Abuja is a good example. An administrative capital should not be growing at the rate Abuja is going. It's because we neglect rural areas. So everybody's flooding to Abuja, to Lagos, and these places become... The other policy issue that will deal with this that I have, if I have time to explain, is manufacturing. Industrial parks in different parts of the country have become nucleus for brand new cities. Quality new housing and all of that. Okay, we'll deal with that later.
All right, General, what will be your blueprint for arresting the drift to the urban centers from the rural areas?
Well, I had already discussed about agriculture, manufacturing, and this has made it absolutely clear that a serious government in Nigeria must be serious about agriculture. All this drift from rural to urban areas is because agriculture does not pay any more. And all you need is to make sure that you put the correct inputs in time. God or nature is so predictable. Everybody knows when the rain starts in Lagos and when it will start in Katsina, or when it will start in Borno, and when it will start in Sokoto, and when it will stop. And in nature's masses, there are seeds developed over generations that mature for harvest within, say, 3 months in Borno and Sokoto, and 9 months maybe at coastal regions. Therefore, I said, we have the infrastructure. All we have to do is to make more input in agriculture, organize cooperatives. And the interesting thing about agriculture, maybe unlike city workers in factories, is that if you empower agriculture, when the harvest is good, the farmer will pay for the input, and all the rest belongs to him. So there is more incentive if you empower agriculture to erase poverty than, in fact, making a factory worker of the lowest level.
Thank you very much, General, but we want to remain with you for the next question. In the last 10 years, Nigeria has been facing a lot of challenges within the petroleum sector. If elected president, what plans do you have that will stabilize the sector and the issue of fuel scarcity solved once and for all?
Yes, during this discussion, I made reference that this government inherited 4 refineries, 2 in Port Harcourt, 1 in Warri, and 1 in Kaduna, and over 3,500 pipes across the country, and over 25 depots. But this government not only has failed to maybe build more refineries if we need them, but they have failed to maintain the infrastructure. And we have been importing, and this country has been importing petroleum products at great cost. This is one of the greatest inefficiencies of this government. And it has, only God knows how much it costs the country. Again, there is serious accusation of corruption in the petroleum industry. I could recall, I think, the chief executive officer of revenue allocation formula and so on, appearing before the Senate and indicting the government that the government was not able to account for substantial amount of money in petroleum industry. So, first, resuscitating the structure in the petroleum industry. Secondly, transparency and accountability there. And the Riot Act has to be read.
Thank you very much, General. Dr. Patutomi.
Well, thank you. You know, in 1997, thereabouts, I was writing a book on the challenge of competition and growth in this economy. And I went to interview a then immediate past managing director of the NNPC, group managing director. And at the point, we kept talking about these problems, how they will give 20 different people contracts to do parts of one turnaround maintenance and all of that and all of that. I said to him at the point, maybe is privatization not a possible way out of this? And he said, oh, I thought NNPC was privatized already. I said to him, what do you mean? He said, oh, well, it was privatized a long time ago. It's just that those who own it did not pay for it. Now, I think this is a very interesting joke from somebody who was group managing director of the NNPC to show how what we are dealing with is a cesspit of corruption. We got to move from that model to something that works. But the key is to prevent us from prospecting, mining all this crude oil, exporting it to Europe, having it refined, and shipping it back to Nigeria. Our neighbors should all be buying refined products from Nigeria. What we must do